Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I'm Ian DeMars alongside co host Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, we had some very bizarre things happen recently in the world of the NFL. How about we get into that right away? It's some pretty interesting news that came out this week.
Yeah, so the biggest story to come out that was somewhat surprising, but it seems less surprising given the history that we know now, is basically that the Packers had a ton of drama throughout the duration of Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers' relationship, which was basically Aaron Rodgers did not think that Mike McCarthy had a big football IQ in any way. He said he had the worst football IQ of any coach that he had ever had. And some of this probably stemmed from him getting passed over in the draft by McCarthy when McCarthy was with the 49ers and opted for Alex Smith. But it led to a bunch of very strange reports about basically Aaron Rodgers disrespecting Mike McCarthy. There was a report that came out about Mike McCarthy skipping meetings to get massages. It was just all over the place. Kind of crazy.
Yeah, and the thing is with this article, this was something that was reported by Bleacher Report, and then suddenly, a few hours later, became mainstream news along the sports world, not just football, but all of sports. We know that it seemed like there might have been some issues between Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers, especially these last couple of seasons with them both struggling a little bit. We did end up hearing from both McCarthy and Rodgers later after the article came out. There were some names that were mentioned in the article about that did comment in regards to sources. There was Greg Jennings, who apparently had some issues with Aaron Rodgers after Aaron Rodgers not wanting to go after him when Greg Jennings became a free agent. Ryan Grant was mentioned in the article, but he seemed more like he was supporting both Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers. There's just a lot to go through here. So, what were your first thoughts on this, and how do you think that the article is accurate before we go into what McCarthy and what Rodgers have to say?
It's hard to tell the accuracy, but you would think that it's a where there's smoke, there's fire situation. There had to have been some sort of bad blood in that relationship for this to come out. And you never really saw that great of a chemistry between Rodgers and McCarthy like you did with some other coaches and quarterbacks. And so I think that along with the other players that have come out and said specific things about that relationship or about how Rodgers was a prima donna or something like that, lend credence to this report. And I actually have some inside information because there's a kind of a like athletic club in the area that apparently Rodgers used to go to for a time and Greg Jennings went to for a time, and Greg Jennings would reportedly complain about Aaron Rodgers all the time while he was there. So it's not terribly surprising given the number of people that are coming out now and saying that this is credible.
Yeah, and you look at the relationship between the two. Obviously, as I mentioned, the last couple of years has been iffy with the Packers struggling, but it goes back to a comment that Rodgers made earlier this in the last season after winning against the Buffalo Bills. Basically, called out Mike McCarthy. There were reports that he didn't necessarily mean to call him out, and he did try patching that up with McCarthy. But I mean, when you with an article like this, it's kind of hard to tell whether everything's true or not. Obviously, when you have some names that get mentioned in there, like a Greg Jennings, like a Ryan Grant, guys that had success with the Packers, some of that becomes true. But when you read the article, there are a lot of sources that are unnamed, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's kind of hard to give the writer credibility if not everyone wants to be named in it. And obviously, it's a big time article when you are discussing one of the best quarterbacks in the league and then one of the best coaches in the league over the past 10 years or so, Mike McCarthy. So when you go into this and kind of break it all down, parts of it do seem true, but also, I think the players that wanted to get their name brought up actually were the ones being honest about it, which kind of puts this in a situation where we really don't know because Greg Jennings had some negative things to say about Aaron Rodgers, but Ryan Grant said positive things about both Rodgers and McCarthy. So it's kind of hard to tell which all of this is true and which all of this is false.
Yeah, that's also true. I wanted to point out though, I feel like when you look at both sides of this right now, I feel like Mike McCarthy has by far been the more classy of the two between him and Rodgers. Because McCarthy could have come out and said, Rodgers is a total prima donna, incredibly difficult. And he's basically just said stuff like, it can be tough at times when you have a quarterback who's, at that level and stuff like that. So I feel like he's been taking the high road. And I'm sure part of it is he wants to get hired as a coach at some point down the road. But I'm definitely more impressed with how McCarthy's been handling this than Rodgers.
Yeah, McCarthy. I thought both of them did a solid job of it. Mike McCarthy, I would say more just because of the fact that he responded to the article in a faster time frame than Aaron Rodgers did. Mike McCarthy denied the rumors, basically saying how the time with he and Aaron Rodgers was a lot of fun. But obviously, like the head coach and the quarterback, there are times where they're going to disagree on stuff, and I think when you have a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers who wants to be such a perfectionist, who wants to make sure that everything goes right, uh, that can lead to some confusing and troubling times between him and McCarthy, which I think probably was a case at times, but I don't necessarily think it was something that got drastically out of hand, like the article was saying how Aaron Rodgers would tell players to run these certain routes over McCarthy's routes, and if he wouldn't, then he would basically phase them out and not throw to them. Aaron Rodgers, on the other hand, just recently, as of a day or two ago, did respond back. He spoke to ESPN Milwaukee about it and basically was denying everything. Kind of was, some of the stuff he said was similar fashion to what Mike McCarthy had said. Basically, was saying how like quarterbacks and coaches they do go through all these types of scenarios, and the unique thing is with Aaron Rodgers is that he's a different kind of star quarterback than a lot of other star quarterbacks in the league. I mean, most people might not know this, but he basically has phased out his entire family. No one really knows the specifics into why that has happened, but that has been the case. But we also see times where he's out like hunting with some teammates and other stuff like that. So it's kind of hard to break down like which part of this stuff is true, which part of this stuff is false. Your inside source in regards to uh, the the athletic club where these guys had worked out is an intriguing thing to mention, which brings in a little bit of credibility. But it's I think this isn't going to be the last we're going to hear of this. This is going to be a topic that's going to continue to be discussed over probably the next month or so until who knows, maybe even possibly until training camp starts.
Yeah, and you want to talk about more former teammate drama. We just had a recent story about Antonio Brown blasting Juju Smith-Schuster and quoting as saying that he fumbled away their playoff hopes in the season last year. What do you think about this? Why is he still hurling stones at his former Steeler teammates?
I mean, saying that, I mean, technically you could say that's what happened. He caused a fumble in a big game that they needed to win. And I think why AB is saying this is because, I mean, you look at Antonio Brown last 5, 6 years. This guy's been maybe the most dominant receiver in the NFL. And even since Juju Smith-Schuster's come into the league, he's still been maybe the most dominant. But what have we seen since Juju Smith-Schuster got his opportunity and finally started getting significant playing time? We're starting to see him get more opportunities, which takes the ball away from Antonio Brown, which means he's getting less opportunities, which means he's not getting the ball as much in games. And Juju Smith-Schuster has thrived. This guy became a Pro Bowler this year. This guy showed that he can be a number one on a team this year. And you can make a case that Juju Smith-Schuster had a better year than Antonio Brown. I think this has something to do with Antonio Brown. Obviously, he wanted to be out of Pittsburgh and everything, but part of me wants to say that he didn't want to get passed by Juju Smith-Schuster. He wanted to be the number one on that team, and he's just deciding now to take it out, which is weird because Antonio Brown got everything he wanted. He got a trade out. He got to a place where that was on his preferred list, and he got a new deal and is going to make a ton of money. It's a little confusing, but I think he didn't want to do it all right after the trade and everything. He wanted to have things settle down a little bit, lay cool, and then once everything got settled down, he wanted to make a point that, hey, this guy cost us an opportunity. This guy might not be as good as you think he is. And I think that the main reason that he did this was to show that this guy costs us, but yet they think he's the best receiver on the team now.
Yeah, it's weird though because it's almost like when you break up with somebody and then you just can't stop trashing them to everybody. It's like you got out of the situation like you wanted. You really came out ahead because the Steelers are presumably not going to be good anymore. It just doesn't seem like there's a lot of point in looking back at the Pittsburgh Steelers and trying to insult your former teammates. It just is not a good look. Even if it's true that Juju Smith-Schuster fumbled away their chances at the playoffs, you can't do that. It's just not something that you do as a good teammate. You don't throw your teammates under the bus, especially when both you and that teammate are still in the league.
Yeah, and I think this kind of shows that maybe Antonio Brown wasn't necessarily the best teammate overall. I mean, we've seen some of the stuff that he's posted on social media. We've seen how he's acted. He's had some tantrums on the field. And I think posting something like this just shows that he's not as a mature player as some people may have thought, and that he's not the best teammate that people might think. And now with him in Oakland, which is kind of a interesting situation with John Gruden, it'll be interesting to see if he can turn Antonio Brown into more of a mature football player and kind of put him in the realm of being a good teammate.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out with him. I don't think this is going to be the last of him talking about his former past with the Steelers. But let's go into some XFL talk. So, Ian, do you want to go over the Twitter question that we had this week?
Yeah, so this past week's Twitter question, basically after the folding of the AAF this past week and a half, questions started to come out about, is this what's going to happen with the XFL? They've had to fold after a season before. But basically, our question focused on the longevity of the new XFL, which is set to start in 2020. The question basically stated, how are they going to be able to last more than one season, unlike the AAF, which didn't even make it a full season? And Facebook and Twitter had different results. Facebook, 61% of voters said that the XFL would not make it past one season, while Twitter had 58% voters said that the XFL would last longer than one season. And you look at what Vince McMahon has done. He's taken out a lot. He sold a lot of his own WWE stock. He's gotten tons of money back in return for it. And it looks like they could have enough money. He gets some more financial supporters, and this league could have the financial stability to last a few seasons. Now, we've seen people invest money into the league, obviously most recently with the AAF, that have taken it out, or are at that point where they don't want to lose money over a few years in order to break even after 5 seasons. But when you do start a new league, you kind of have to realize that you're not going to make money your first couple of years. It's going to take time before that does happen. And that's why I think the XFL is going to find more success this time around. They have the money. They have some big-time names. They're doing a lot of research into this. That's why Vince McMahon didn't start this right away. I think it was the AAF starting it within a year was kind of an interesting call. I think when you decide to start a league, you obviously have to give it some time. You have to obviously find where you want to play. You have to find the right coaches. You have to make sure you have the players and everything. Vince McMahon did it right this time, waiting a couple years, and when 2020 comes, they're going to start, and they're going to last longer than a year. At least that's what my take's on. I'm not sure what your take is, though.
I think that you're right on that. I think a big part of it is that this is being bankrolled essentially by one guy, and Vince McMahon just sold that $272 million in WWE shares to try to fund this XFL. And this shows that he's prepared to lose some money before this thing becomes profitable. And I think that they waited because they knew that they had to get this all together. I think the AAF just jumped the gun because they knew they weren't only competing with the NFL, they were also going to be competing with the XFL if they didn't get a good jump on it. And I think that really worked against them. They weren't prepared for how much money they were going to have to shell out before it potentially became profitable. Let's not forget that Vince McMahon has done this one time before, and he knows some of the shortfalls of this and some of the traps that you can get stuck in. That's why I think he's prepared to fund this for at least a couple of years. I don't think we would see it go away after the first season. And in a weird way, even though it was a failed league before, now the XFL has some clout to the name behind it. Like, people to some degree remember the XFL. There's a 30 for 30 about it. And I think they'll be more excited for its revival this time around than they were this new product last time. The AAF was sort of like this new thing that you didn't know what was gonna happen with it. We'd never seen it before. It seemed very similar to NFL football or NFL Europe. The XFL was branded on being different, and you still kind of have that vibe in your head. Like, the branding of it is that it's different, somehow more hardcore, and now they're throwing more money at it. And I think they'll succeed for a couple of seasons. I don't know if they'll ever be truly profitable or stand alone without Vince McMahon's personal backing, but I think that they put themselves in a good position to get there.
And something that a lot of people might forget about is that the XFL doesn't have the age restrictions that the NFL does, where you have to go to college for at least 3 years in order to go to the NFL draft. We can see guys maybe enter the XFL after a season in college, make a couple, play for a couple years, make some money, and then go right to the NFL. Or maybe if they still need time to develop, stay in the XFL. This is going to be something that I think we are going to see more of. We're going to see some. I don't think it'll be top heavy college prospects at first, but we're going to see some college players that are going to take advantage of this opportunity, go to a professional league in the XFL, make a little bit of money, and then when things come down the line a couple years later, maybe they'll have that opportunity to go to the NFL and make even more money. That's something that not many people are remembering. And I think this is something that's going to also strive success in the XFL.
Yeah, it could strive some success in the XFL. And there's some interesting new things coming to the XFL. Do you want to go over those?
Yeah, so Andrew or Oliver Luck of the XFL basically past day had talked about how on touchdowns, the XFL is going to be implementing extra point, a 2-point conversion, and a 3-point conversion. So basically how this would go is after a touchdown is scored, if you want to go for the extra point, you would call a play from the 2-yard line. If you go for 2 points, you would call a play from the 5-yard line. And if you're looking to go for 3 points, you would call a play from the 10-yard line, which basically means that a team could score a 9-point touchdown on a drive, which is very intriguing because if you look at games that are 17-point differentials, now it's not necessarily a 3-possession game. You get a 9-point touchdown and an 8-point touchdown, and you're right back in the game. So that's definitely something that the XFL is taking up, or that's making it very more interesting. And another thing that they're doing, that they're currently testing in the spring league, which is what they're doing a lot of their testings with at this time, is that they're going to do for their overtimes, they're going to do the 5 plays from the 2-point conversion line, so the 5-yard line. And the thing is, both teams' offenses and defenses will be on the field at the same time. So one team's offense and defense will be on one side. One team's their team's offense and defense will be on the other side of the field. They would do their 5 plays from the 5-yard line, and then basically what happens is if you get the conversion, I believe you get 2 or 3 points, and then if the defense gets a turnover, they get a point. So after all that's done, that determines the winner of the game. And then basically why they're doing that is to try and keep the game in a 3-hour limit. They were saying that the maximum time they want a game to go is 3 hours. They don't want to go any longer than that. They want to keep the game as short as possible, as fast moving as possible. I think that these things that they're implementing are very unique, and I'm very looking forward to seeing what is going to happen when we do see the XFL start.
Yeah, and I think it's obvious why they're doing the different types of conversions too. It's because they want these games to be close. They want every team to have pretty much a chance to win in the final minute. They don't want these to be incredibly blowout games. They want you to be able to come back in a game. So it's a good idea from the standpoint of they're going to get closer games. They're going to get more one-score games because that scoring potential is so much of a broad spectrum now. Between scoring 6 points and scoring 9 points, that's a pretty big disparity. So you're not going to most likely get a lot of games where a team is just far and away ahead of the other one from a points perspective. I think that the shootout is an interesting concept. I think they should do it more like you run a play from the 5. If you don't make it and the other team makes their play from the 5, then game is over. I hope that it turns out that it's both teams are on the field, but they're not actually doing the thing at the exact same time. I think it would be cool to have everybody on the field kind of watching this game like behind the play and then having to turn around and do it on the other side.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool if they kind of did it like how hockey or like soccer do, like shootouts where like one team goes, everyone watches. I think that's kind of what they're kind of looking to implement with this. They're saying they basically were wanting to do this based off of stuff that happens in hockey and extra and overtime and shootouts, and same thing with soccer. So I think that's what they're going to be looking at to do when they do implement this.
You know what I think they should do is they should do Hail Mary pass shootouts. So basically like put 3 people from each team in the end zone and just heave a ball into the end zone and do that on both sides. I think that would be really entertaining.
I think that's something the XFL could possibly experiment at some point. And the Spring League is in process, so, I mean, now's the time to implement that if you're looking to possibly test it.
You could even do 2 quarterbacks on the field at the same time throwing to different halves of the end zone with a total of, like, 4 players or something in the end zone. Like, it could be really cool. I'm just throwing it out there. I think if the XFL ever gets a hold of this, they should contemplate it.
Yeah, and the thing is with the AAF and the XFL is they put in these unique twists on the game, which I think are getting fans' attention. Like in the AAF, where instead of doing onside kicks, they would do the onside conversion. I think that's something that was a cool aspect that could be implemented. I could possibly see that implemented in the NFL within maybe within the next 5 or 10 years, just because of the fact that the onside kick isn't necessarily a successful play nowadays, especially with all the kickoff rule changes.
Yeah, so the numbers were way down on the onside kick in terms of percentage success.
Yes, and I think based off what happens in the XFL, we can maybe even see some more rule changes that could possibly happen. But that's something that we won't be able to see until next year. So it will take the NFL a few seasons before they would look into possibly evaluate their rule changes. But let's flip back quickly to the AAF. Now, we have seen that since the league has suspended operations, they've given their players the right to sign with teams in the NFL, and we actually did see a good number of teams actually sign in the NFL or sign with teams in the NFL. Garrett Gilbert, the quarterback for the Orlando Apollos, signed with the Cleveland Browns. Hotshots wide receiver Rashad Ross signed with the Carolina Panthers. The first guy that actually did sign a deal was Keith Reeser, who was a cornerback for the Apollos, who signed with the Chiefs. Other notables in the league that also signed contracts, we saw that Luis Perez, the quarterback for the Birmingham Iron, he signed a deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. We also saw multiple other guys from the Iron. Brandon Green signed with the Carolina Panthers. He was a tackle. Cornerback Jack Tacho is signed with the Steelers. So we did see a good number of players sign in the NFL. So based off of that, even though the league did suspend operations, would you say because we did see these players get signed that the league for what it was for 8 weeks was a success?
I don't think I can say that the league was a success. I think it's been a success for a number of players that you mentioned because now they're getting a look. the league itself, I think we have to dub as a failure because the end result that they were looking for did not happen. They lasted part of a season, didn't continue. Sure, they got some names moved into the NFL, but when we look back, the AAF, I think, is mostly just going to be, remember that there's probably going to be one player that came out of it that makes some sort of splash in the NFL. We're going to say, remember that league that yada, yada, yada used to play for, and it lasted almost a season until the XFL came. And I don't think that we can view this as a success because the goal was not met.
Yeah, if this would have lasted at least a season, you can make an argument. The fact that it did cut out after 8 weeks does hurt that in regards to it being a success. You also look at some of these notables who haven't had an opportunity to sign yet. Charles Johnson, a guy who's been in the NFL, who was leading the AAF in receiving, hasn't signed yet. Trent Richardson, who, despite leading the AAF in touchdown, hasn't signed, but did struggle with his yards per carry. It will be interesting to see if either one of those guys do get signed, and it'll be interesting to see if either one of them signs with he's now going by John, and that's John Manziel. He had talked about possibly having an opportunity. He's had some contact with some coaches. I know we're kind of opposite ends for Johnny Manziel, but do you think he would get another opportunity in the NFL?
I really don't think so. I think that he didn't show enough splash in terms of his playing ability to make someone take on the baggage that he brings with him, because he wasn't even close to being a productive starter in the NFL. He was a failure in terms of his off-the-field issues, and he was a failure on the field. So I don't see a reason why someone would bring him back.
I think he'll get an opportunity. He'll be like a training camp invite. I could see him maybe sticking onto a team as a backup. I'm not sure if I see his opportunity as a starting quarterback in the NFL anymore. I think that those days are behind him. I mean, you look at the two quarterbacks that did sign. Garrett Gilbert, he's signed with the Cleveland Browns, who have their future in Baker Mayfield. So he's going to be competing for a backup spot. You look at Luis Perez, a guy that was kind of up and down in the AF with the Iron. He signed with the Eagles, who have a franchise quarterback and Carson Wentz. But they also didn't have the best backup situation after Nick Foles signed with the Jags. So a lot of these guys in the AF aren't necessarily going to get starting time opportunities like they did over the 8-week period in the Alliance. So I do think that these quarterbacks are going to get opportunities just because teams take in like 5-6 quarterbacks during training camp. So even if they're not the best quarterbacks, they're going to get that opportunity. And that's why I think he's going to get an opportunity, at least in the training camp.
But he's been down this road before, and he essentially failed out of Canadian football too. So it's not like people haven't seen what Johnny Manziel can do.
That's true, and he did have some struggles in the Canadian Football League. But even with the brief 2 games he played in the Alliance, there was something different about him. He had that swagger that he had when he was at Texas A&M. He even said that he hadn't had that much fun playing football in those 2 weeks with the Memphis Express. He hadn't had that much fun since when he was at Texas A&M. So I think he's starting to get that opportunity of playing with confidence, playing with that swagger. And I think that's going to help him possibly get an opportunity to at least get some preseason action this year.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Those were essentially college players he was playing against. So, of course, he had a little more swagger because it was significantly easier.
Yeah, that's a good case, too. It'll just be interesting because the fact that he's going by John Manziel now instead of Johnny has a different ring to it, if you think about it.
It's the rebrand. He's going with the rebrand. Let's talk a little bit about quick signings in the NFL. DeMarcus Lawrence gets a new deal with the Cowboys. Adrian Claiborne re-signs with the Falcons. Are these good signings? Are they important? What do you think this does for both of those teams?
Let's start with the Claiborne signing. I think it's a good signing just because he's been a big part of that defense. He's been able to put pressure on the quarterback. He's a veteran for that team. I think that defense, which I think is starting to go younger, needs at least one good veteran presence. I think Claiborne can be that guy for them. DeMarcus Lawrence, he was going to get a new deal. It was just a matter of when it was going to be. A lot of people were surprised that it didn't happen when the Cowboys ended up getting a franchise tag. But now that he does have that deal, this means that they can focus on their next pieces, which they need to do with Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott with their rookie contract starting to come up soon. And you look at, he's been a huge focal point of that defense last couple of years. The defense has improved drastically with him just dominating, being in the top 5 in the NFL the last couple of years in sacks. He's the piece that they've been missing, and then they've been getting some other young pieces as well. Jalen Smith, Leighton Vander Esch. They got some good pieces on that defense. The offense, they have some good young pieces too. The Cowboys are making the right moves, and now it's just a matter of making sure that they can keep these young players for as long as they can.
That's a fair take on that. I don't really have any different opinions on that. I think they're both solid signings. I don't know that either of these teams are going to be Super Bowl contenders. I think they're probably going to be middle of the road for their conference this year. So they're going to have to make some more moves to get into that conversation again. I know a lot of people are hopping on the Cowboy bandwagon after how they finished off last season. I just don't really see them being a team that has enough offensive firepower, even with Amari Cooper and Ezekiel Elliott, because I still don't trust Dak Prescott. So there's that. Let's talk a little bit about NFL draft, Ian. It's coming up, and obviously a great deal of the speculation is who should the Cardinals take and who will the Cardinals take. So if you had to pick a player for the Cardinals to take, who would you take first overall?
So the Cardinals have a kind of a tough situation. They struggled drastically in offense last year, and the defense wasn't what they've been these last few years, which has been somewhat of a top 15 defense. They took a step back. So they obviously could go either or in this case. The thing is, if you go offense, some of the pieces that you would go for offensively, you wouldn't really take number one unless you go with Kyler Murray. But you can't give up on Josh Rosen after 1 year. He didn't even play a full year. Remember, he didn't step into the starting job until I believe it was the 4th week of the season. So you have to at least give him a full season to see what he can do, and you have to surround him with some talent. There are some injuries on the offense that played a factor as well. And I think with this draft being so defensive heavy, you have to go defense here. And the guy who is the freshest, the guy who ended up withdrawing from school to focus on the draft after an injury, I think is the best guy to go with here, and that's Nick Bosa. We've seen what his brother Joey's done in the NFL. Has been a dominant force on the defensive side of the football for the Los Angeles Chargers. And his brother Nick was being said to be better than Joey was in college, which is a scary thing to say. And if Arizona is looking at a guy who can be an impact player right away, I think you have to go with Nick Bosa in this case because he has had the time to recover from his injuries. He's fresh. He's looked good in his workouts. I think you have to go with him here because on offense, if you're looking to fix that offense, I'm not necessarily saying that Kyler Murray isn't the guy. I just think that they have more space to fill on that team than quarterback. So I think in this case, because of that, unless you're trading back in the draft, you pick Nick Bosa and you make him your franchise player in defense.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for you. I would ordinarily pick Bosa just like you did because I think defensive line and offensive line are incredibly important, overlooked parts of a team. But I'm going to go Kyler Murray in this instance, and here's why. I don't think that he's necessarily the right guy per se to turn the franchise around. So for the franchise, I'm not going to say he's the right guy. But for Cliff Kingsbury, who they hired to be some sort of quarterback guru, who had no choice in the matter in taking Josh Rosen, I think it's important to get him a guy that you can label as his guy that he's going to mentor and work with. And now Josh Rosen, I've had reservations about ever since he came out of college, ever since people said that he was going to get bored and needs to be challenged so that he stays active and engaged, which is a ridiculous thing to say about somebody who's pretty much an adult at this point in their life. I think you have to pair Cliff Kingsbury with Kyler Murray to see how they do, to see how Kyler Murray can grow, and to get that fan base energized again. Because to be honest, for a first-round pick, nobody was really that excited about bringing in Josh Rosen. And we saw what he could do last year. It wasn't that great. And sure, the Cardinals' offense isn't a juggernaut, even if they had a really good quarterback. But I don't think that we can trust him to be the guy in Arizona. And I think you might as well bring in a Kyler Murray. Cliff Kingsbury already said that he would draft Kyler Murray first overall if he had the choice. Well, it just so happens he does actually have the choice.
I think, yeah, Kyler Murray is definitely, maybe you could make an argument, the top prospect in this draft. But I think it's too early to give up on Josh Rosen, a guy that you took in the top 10 of the draft last year. I know we both kind of been opposite on Josh Rosen. I think that this guy has a lot of potential. I think he has the opportunity to maybe put up some numbers like Aaron Rodgers. They're not nearly the same athletic-wise, but I think that Josh Rosen has that potential to be a star in this league. He just needs some time to work with his offense. Obviously, when he was in college, he played in a different system. I think that working in a more high-tempo spread system that Kingsbury brings in could be something that could help benefit Josh Rosen. Now, Ryan, let's say, for example, if you're still sticking offense and they didn't go Kyler Murray, one, would you draft someone else on the offensive side of the football, number one? Or would you trade back, and who would you draft then if you were to trade back?
I think that I would probably trade back and go O-line. I wouldn't keep that spot and go with anybody else on offense because this is a pretty defense-heavy draft. So if you're going to be drafting high overall, you generally want one of the defensive players. You can get a decent offensive lineman. And we mentioned a couple of them last week. I think it was either last week or 2 weeks ago. I think there's sort of a horse apiece in that regard with the top three offensive linemen. I think that team needs a line help on the offensive side and the defensive side. But I would probably still stick with my guns and go Kyler Murray if you're going to take him or take anybody that high. However, when you mentioned they shouldn't give up on Josh Rosen, yeah, I don't think that NFL should give up on Josh Rosen, but I think that they can trade Josh Rosen and get some decent draft picks back for him. And you could trade him and maybe get, I don't know if you could get a first round for him. If there was some team that was really enamored by him, maybe you could, but you can at least recoup some of your picks that I think are going to be lost on him if you stick it out with him. And let's not forget either that Larry Fitzgerald probably only has 1 year left in the NFL. You might as well make it a special one with an exciting player that can use his legs and get the ball down the field better than Rosen does.
Yeah, you look at the situation if they were to trade the pick and go offense. Offensive line isn't a terrible move. I mean, you look at that team, they had an older offensive line, with the exception of Mason Cole, who was a rookie out of Michigan last year for that offensive line. So going guard, going tackle, I think would be a good move in that case if they were to trade back. Also, I think trading back to get a receiver wouldn't be a bad idea as well. You could go for a DK Metcalf. You could go for A.J. Brown. You could go for Marquise Brown from Oklahoma. There are some options on the table there. Now, in my case, Ryan, if for some reason, if someone wanted to go after maybe like a Kyler Murray and trade up to get him with the Cardinals were to trade back. Let's say they trade back 3 or 4 spots. In that case, who do you think they would go with defensively if they trade?
Assuming that Bosa is gone, I think they would probably try to go with Josh Allen if he were still there. Josh Allen is going to be a solid player in the NFL, and he could really help bolster that linebacker, defensive end, edge rusher sort of position for the Cardinals. I think that he's going to be a really good player, and I think that he could still potentially be there if the Jets don't pick him. I have him going to the Jets, so it depends how far they would trade back. But I think he would be the guy to go for if they could find a way to get him.
And the thing is, with this draft being so heavy defensively, if they were to trade back, let's say, to the 5th spot, or even to like the 10th spot, I don't think they're necessarily losing a lot defensively. I mean, you trade back a few spots, they have possibility again of Josh Allen, maybe a guy like Devin White. Or you trade back a few more spots, you get a guy maybe like Ed Oliver, Rashawn Gary, Montez Sweat. This is a very talented draft defensively. So if they think a team wants Kyler Murray, make a trade, get some. You can still get a very good defensive player. If you don't, then you could go with Murray. You could go with Bosa. And next week, when we start our mock drafts for the first round, we're both going to come to our decisions on what's going to happen. And after tonight, we might have different picks for the first pick.
Yeah, we will have to see how that goes for us. I am excited for the draft. Ian, how are you feeling about it? We've talked about it a lot. It's coming up.
I mean, I'm pretty excited about it. I mean, it's different because I think the last couple of years we've seen like a lot of like big, huge name quarterbacks that have been taken early. You look at last year with the quarterbacks taken within the first 10 picks was definitely something I was not expecting. And I remember last year walking out of Avengers, pulling up my phone and seeing that the Browns did the unthinkable and drafted Baker Mayfield. My first thought was, I can't believe they did this. And you look at end of the season, I'm like, I'm glad they did this because they definitely made the right move after looking at some of the quarterbacks that played this year. I think that one that does this year, when I walk out of Avengers Endgame and see who they pick first overall, I might have that same feeling.
And the Packers draft high too, so that's something to look forward to.
And they have 2 draft picks too, so it'll be interesting to see if they keep those both the picks, or if someone's willing to make a trade with them, and maybe they could trade up, maybe they trade back. But I think that the right call would be to at least keep the higher pick, and then maybe have the option of playing around with that later.
Yeah. So we're at about that time where we're going to talk about some fantasy sports stuff.
Yep, and this week we're kind of taking a different twist on it. So when the Alliance was in football action for the past 8 weeks, if you weren't someone that downloaded the Alliance app, it was something that had a very unique twist on it. And the thing that I noticed on there was it kind of gave you an opportunity to play along with the game. It gave you an opportunity to basically predict what the play was going to be, whether it was going to be a run or a pass, which direction it was going to be, whether it was going to be a first down, whether it was going to be a touchdown. It was something that I would play along with whenever I was able to watch the games. It was something that was pretty cool, and I think something that definitely helped the league out a little bit for the 8 weeks that it did run. Now, based off of that, Ryan, I'm going to ask you. I know Charlie Ebersol had said that they wanted to do something like this to kind of maybe develop that into the NFL to get the NFL's attention as part of their process of being a developmental league for the NFL. Do you think that this could be something possible for the NFL to do? Not necessarily just this, but maybe doing something where you're able to watch the games on the app like the Alliance was able to
do. Ugh. I don't think the NFL wants people to be able to watch it for free, to be honest, because we have to put up with a stupid NFL network all year when some games are only televised on that because they want you to have to order it separately. So I don't really see the NFL getting on board with that anytime soon when it wants people to be restricted and it wants people to pay extra to see it. And it's going to utilize the fact that people want to watch the games for the most part. The AAF was in a different position where they were trying to convince anybody to watch the games. The NFL feels like they have a product that's worth holding on to and only giving out to people that have money to pay for it. The AAF was trying to give it out to anybody that wanted it. And they just wanted to generate some sort of buzz, generate some sort of interest, get eyes on the product on the field. In terms of some of the other stuff with the AAF that they did, such as trying to predict what was going to happen in the game, I think that we could see more of that stuff happening because people are already so into fantasy sports that they're going to probably eat up anything that brings them closer to the game action in some sort of way. Anything that leads to them being glued to their TV even more than they already are. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it, especially with the NFL going to Las Vegas in the next couple of years. I think we're going to see an increased influence on things that resemble gambling in the NFL, and I think that fits the bill.
Yeah, I'll start off with the streaming of the games that you talked about. When the Alliance did it, they kind of did it where when they did show the games, it didn't have like any of the commentators or anything, unless it was a game that was on national TV. Then in those cases, they would have that. If it wasn't a nationally televised game, so if it was on like CBS Sports, Bleacher Report Live, or NFL Network, those games would just show like different angles of the game, so not necessarily angles that you would see on TV. That's something. If the NFL were to do that, that's the only thing I could see them doing. So if you're an out of market, if your team's out of market, that would be a possibility where you could see a game, but just with no commentary. That's something that could be possible. It's, I would say, somewhat unlikely, as you had mentioned, but if they were to, that would possibly be it. Now, looking at the whole fantasy aspect of it, with legalized betting, this is something that the NFL could score huge dollars on. Vegas could score huge dollars on this. But having someone bet like $5 on if a play is going to go to the right or left, whether it's going to be a run or a pass. And if you, let's say you put in like $10 for a whole game or whatever, that limits, like, you can make it to where like each bet you make is like a certain dollar amount. And once you get to a certain point where you run out of your money that you put in, then you obviously can't keep doing it unless you put in more money, which is going to give more money for the NFL in Vegas. Or we can see where people are starting to win, which means more and more people are going to want to do it, which means this is going to make more and more opportunities for the NFL in Vegas and all these sports books to make tons of money. So that aspect is something I can see happening. And I can see this possibly happening within the next couple of years after the Raiders move to Vegas. I think that's when we're going to see a huge aspect of the sports betting world come into play in the NFL. We're starting to see a little bit of it now with states starting to legalize sports betting. But I think once the Raiders move to Vegas, we're going to see a lot more betting going on. I think implementing something that the AF had started could be the start of it and could lead to the NFL making a lot of money.
Think about the ridiculous amount of bets you can make on one NFL game or even one NFL quarter when you can try to predict who's going to touch the ball, which direction the play is going to go, how many yards it's going to go for, if it'll be a negative play or a positive play, if it'll be incomplete or it'll be complete. It's just a ridiculous amount of variables that you have to bet on if that's the route they're going to go. So you could see just complete pandemonium in terms of the betting that people are going to be doing on the NFL.
And you could even make it into like a fantasy league sort of aspect, kind of what the AF was, where like you get certain points for what was correct, or you lose points or not get any points for something that was incorrect. And you could like build something off of that into making that like a fantasy game, which I think was their original intention. But after playing it, you could tell that there were some issues with it since it was a newer app. But I think that if the NFL can do something like that, turn into like a fantasy gig kind of thing, I think that's going to be huge. With obviously with the whole betting thing coming into full play now, but with everyone that does fantasy, I think this is something that everyone's going to and everyone's going to want to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that people are already sucked in enough, and I think they're just going to continue to get sucked in.
I do think so. And with that said, Ryan, that does bring us to the conclusions of this week's episode. What final thoughts do you have?
Thanks again to everybody for continuing to listen. We appreciate your support and your engagement on the Twitter and Facebook polls each week. We hope you're enjoying those. Definitely continue to like the Brew Sports and Touchdown Tuesday pages on Facebook and follow on Twitter, and listen to the show on Google Play, Spreaker, and iTunes.
Yeah, also don't forget about our buddies Erickson Sam's basketball podcast running back. They've had some technical issues this past couple of weeks in. Sam has also moved out to Colorado, which has kind of delayed their episodes, but they had gotten their issues fixed. They should be getting some episodes out with the NBA playoffs coming to start this weekend. And then, like I said, thank you again for listening to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. Check us out each week on iTunes, Google Play, and Spreaker. Or if you want to stay up late with us, come check us out live on YouTube each week as well. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Keep an eye out for the question of the week. If you are a fan of Twitter, check out the handle at TDWN2's podcast, where you can catch all the information about Touchdown Tuesdays and also look at Brew Sports as well to check out Run It Back. Possibly getting our website going again soon. We're starting to get that going. So hopefully in the next month or so we can get that going. And the rumors of our baseball podcast are still in the works, and hopefully we can get that going soon as well for you. But again, thank you for listening to this week's episode. We look forward to talking to you next week, and we look forward to giving you our mock draft of the first round next week as well. So everybody, thank you again. Take care. We'll see you next week.